And so, on behalf of the Pothohar Association, it's really a pleasure to introduce Dr. Ishmeet Chowdhry, who is an associate professor at the University of Gujarat.
University of Gujarat.
Central University of Gujarat, okay, in fact. And she's an academic, a writer, a poet, and whose work explores literature, memory trauma, and marginal histories. And so today, the topic of her talk is Remembering Partition Through Art. And so she brings kind of a sensitive, insightful perspective on how creative expression helps us understand loss, survival, and inherited memory. And she has some of her pieces that I think she's passed around for you to look, and not just look at, but feel, I think, which is quite important. So let me, without further ado, introduce to you Dr. Chowdhry.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's actually a very nostalgic moment for me because I get associated to people of my community. We talk about Pothohar. All our childhood, we've grown up listening to stories of Kahota, where my ancestors were from, and there's always been a sense of pride that, you know, we all are from Kahota, and people from Kahota are very progressive. You know, I mean, I don't know how true that is, but this is how, you know, we all grew up, and so it's in a way quite strange that you are in England and you connect with your roots back home. And that's something also very interesting about borders, right, and how borders function. Moreover, the venue of today's talk is quite overwhelming, right? So a couple of years back, I was working on partition when I was presenting my research in the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, which is the Vice Regal Lodge, the summer capital for the British in India. And it was very interesting to see that, you know, in independent India, right, now we are talking about our experiences of, you know, being decolonized and of consequence of colonization. And it was equally overwhelming to do that in the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies because there's a table over there on which the partition was signed. And today again, you know, now you're in the land of those people who brought you, you know, this experience, maybe the suffering, if I'm not wrong. Partition becomes a very dear subject to me. So let me also, you know, speak about a little bit about my research. I have worked quite a bit on 1984 anti-Sikh massacres, and I today understand that that's because of a certain childhood trauma which perhaps I'm carrying in my mind, which doesn't let me come out of it. I was 6 years old, and when I did the first book in 2019, one of the questions which kept coming back to me from all corners was that, don't you feel sad, you know, working on trauma? Or my sister-in-law said, I'll keep the book, but I'm not going to read it. My another friend said that, you know, thank you. I gave her the book as a gift. She said, thank you for gifting me, but it's just going to be there in my shelf. I'm never going to read it. And it was not like, you know, they were scared or something, but they felt it was a very painful subject. And they would ask me, like, don't you feel sad? That's the sentence that's the question that kept coming times and again. So I did think about this, and I realized that I did not, I was touched by it. But how could I work on it? It's not that I never felt sad. It is the sadness that made me, you know, work on it. But how I worked on it and why I worked on it was primarily because there was a training from the childhood where we were talking about these kinds of concerns. We were talking about conflict, we were talking about violence, we were talking about migration. So my grandfather would talk to us and he would tell us his stories of migrating to India and how he came. And they were not pleasant folk tales, they were not pleasant stories of kings and queens, of Rapunzel or Cinderella. These were their own experiences. And he talked to us about a train incident. He took a train when he came to India, and that was full of dead bodies. And how he fell on one of the bodies and he felt it was his mother's body. And then he couldn't, trace his mother for about 7-8 months till he actually found her and was, relieved that she's still alive. So these were the kind of stories, and these stories had become markers for us. So we would say, "Acha wo train wali story suna do," right? Or we would say, "Ye acha gurdware mein gaye the aap log, wo wali story suna do." So these were like kind of maybe adventurous stories for us. And these stories were coming from all quarters. Grandmother, my maternal grandmother and maternal grandparents talking to us, my paternal grandfather talking to us. And I think this is what was, in a way, a certain kind of a training, which allowed me to work on 84. But 84 took me back to partition. There's a lot of people whom I was interviewing and trying to study. They said, we were saved because we already had an experience of violence during partition, and we knew what was conniving here. And I got back to my parents and I started talking to them about Chowdhry and about Santali. So these two became, fixed sites of memory for me. Where am I today and why partition? And there's a lot that has already been done on partition. As a researcher, this becomes very crucial for us to preserve our histories. How do we preserve our histories, and particularly in a place where there is no intention of anybody to preserve histories? And everything is either too sensationalized, horrors of partition, right? Or it is completely dismissed, oh, a lot of work has been done, now stop it, right? So people come up with proposals on partition for PhD, which are completely dismissed, that it's already done and dusted, let's leave it. Recently, a lot of conferences has seen an upsurge of partition coming back into academics. And I see a lot of new generations talking about partition, digging out community stories. And most interestingly, I came across one group that has studied the partition experience of the Jain community, right? And how they came back and they settled in Gujarat, and how that community came up. And there's another very interesting research which I came across is Sindhis settled in Tamil Nadu, and their experience of partition. So if we see, there is a lot still to be done. And the only book in psychology, there's just one book that talks about the psychological trauma of partition, and there are disciplines where it has not been touched at all. So this is where I look at the importance of partition, and we have to keep the query going on. There's another book being done, which is by the which is a collection of third generation stories on partition. I'm very happy my story has been selected for that volume. It is being done by some Pakistani authors. So they're collecting stories of Bangladeshi, Indian and Pakistani writers, but the third generation tales. So this is where I am, the third generation. I call myself a storehouse of my grandparents' memories. These memories are not neat memories. They are fragmented memories. I have pieces from here, there, everywhere. I do not have a chronology. I do not have evidences. I do not have authenticity. But I have shared the experience of my parents and my grandparents' narratives. So there is a language that is embedded in my psyche, and that language gives birth to these fragmented memories. One of the pieces of, how do we kind of engage with memory? So one of the ways to engage with memory is through art. And that is where I am today. Satish Gujral has been a painter who really painted partition quite a bit. And he said, how do I move? So he said that after a long time, I realized that I didn't paint partition, but I painted my own suffering. If I understand, this line, I think it's very much the same for me too, and for anybody who's doing partition art. And so we are painting somewhere a part of our own selves, either painting, curating, or in whatever form. And maybe writing stories, maybe writing poems, maybe making films, So it's just a part of our own selves. Now comes a very important question, that where is self in research? Because social sciences says that you have to be very objective, and when you talk about self, you're very subjective. I'm completely unapologetic about this idea of bringing self into research, because self brings experience, and experience is the most authenticated thing. As a student of literature, I think I'm challenging the social sciences ideal of objectivity and research. Coming from a family which experienced partition, and I think many of us today here have also come from such families. We look at it as a form of transcultural memory, since it's a collective memory of people from different locations, regions, also across generations. So it's not that it is my memory, but it's a generational memory which is being passed over. One of my friends was telling me about his family. He's from Bengal, and he told me how schizophrenia had passed on in his family. And it started with the partition experience. And his family now carries schizophrenia, as a disease. And some women who had experienced migration and maybe molestation, and they were never treated for that. And now it has become a generational thing. So memory also sometimes passes on in forms of diseases. Okay. So these are a couple of questions, like how did we define the transcultural memory, and specifically in the context of partition? Does transcultural overlap with cross-cultural? And in the bid to answer these questions, the family experience comes in. One of the major concerns had been that, the family did not face one partition. The family faced multiple partitions, because family moved from one Punjab to another Punjab. So, the Chowdhry Punjab and the Lenda Punjab, right? So they came to India, with the idea of coming to Punjab. And with us, my maternal family came to Shimla, and my maternal family went to Kurukshetra, and my paternal family came to Shimla. And Punjab, the Indian Punjab, went through another partition. And that was, being divided into Haryana and Himachal. So, the big Punjab which you had, right, was now reduced to a very small little Punjab, right? So from 3,57,000 square meters, you have just 50,000 square meters, right? So you just reduced to not even 1/4 of it, lesser than that, right? And you are a Punjabi, but you're not a Punjabi. So you have your roots in Punjab, and because you're from a Sikh community, so you are supposed to be a Punjabi, but you've never lived in Punjab. So you are Himachali, right? And my maternal parents were Haryanvis, right? Now we are in Indian diaspora. I'm in Gujarat. Our daughter is a Gujarati. My husband was born, brought up in Visakhapatnam, right? His roots are in Gurdaspur, but he is, I often say, that species of Sardarji, that rare species of Sardarji that speaks Telugu, right? So how do we locate ourselves? And when we look at this kind of a displacement, I'm talking of Indian diaspora, and you all are in diaspora, so you will be able to relate to it, empathetically. All right. So new space basically demanded new adjustments, and they happened at the cost of a lot of loss. And one major loss was the loss of language and culture. We are Pothoharis. We are known with this idea of the linguistic Pothohar. I want to know how many of us know Pothohar.
Just a few words.
Yeah. So that's exactly what happened. So my mother, perhaps, and this community is known by its linguistic, belt. So it's not just the Rawalpindis, the people from Attak and some other districts.
So they did speak a different type of...
And interestingly, Pothohari is still alive. Right. So you would find a lot of people in Pakistan speaking Pothohari still.
Yes.
But all those who migrated, we lost it. So my mother apparently is the last speaker of Pothohari in my close relatives. But she does not have any listeners. So my mother used to speak in Pothohari very emotionally with her parents and with my grandfather. But after, my grandfather passed away, now she has nobody to speak to. And I see that kind of a loss somewhere in her. And I have been yearning, to somewhere match up with that, but I am not being able to do that. Because even if I learn, I do not have speakers. Right, and language needs groups. Language, you have to communicate. You need speakers. So that's the biggest loss. The loss of language and culture. We also became quite urbanized because I don't know any of the cultural things from Pothohar. I don't know the kind of maybe embroidery that we had. I don't know if we had a Fulkari culture. My cousin says that Fulkari culture is a very Jat culture. It is not the Pothohari culture. We've lost the cuisine, foods, right? We don't know. And likewise, maybe nuances of a lot of things, right? And we are totally at loss. So we have actually become, I'm using the term uncultured. So when Britishers said that Indians were uncultured, actually we were not uncultured. We did have a culture. But today we are uncultured because we've actually lost our culture, right? And we are assimilating with other cultures. I think that's the need of the hour. And that's where I want to, bring in this consciousness. I'm trying to tell people, let's develop kits. Let's develop language kits. Let's develop, let's try to revive it. Let's go back and see what's happening. Maybe we could collect recipes and come up with a Pothohari recipe book. Maybe we could, get in touch with, our counterparts in Pakistan and understand their weddings and kinds of things. Maybe we could extract some kind of a culture from there. Anyways, so these fragments of language and culture basically form registers in the mind, and they revisit in forms of memory, times and again. And individual memories basically allow alternative histories, but are they enough for representation, or do they really rely on collective memories? So what would we, I'm sure if after the talk we will sit down, many of you will come up with your stories, which would be similar stories like, my parents' stories or with my family's stories. And, they could be, that is what is collective memory. Collective memory is when he calls up and he asks me, ask your relatives about my nanny's name. And then the whole family revisits, to find out his nanny's name, my uncle's dadi's name. And it's not, the point is not the outcome. The point is that you're revisiting, those, what do you say, contours of memory, But what happens when this generation passes away? What happens with my daughter, right, who's the 4th generation? Is it going to stop here, right? Or are we going to continue? So the query is, how do we continue, right? I'm actually going to skip a couple of things because I want to come to, the art pieces. Saloni Mathur is also another art historian, and she has done work on partition and visual arts. She raises a number of questions of art history and the visual arts with respect to partition, and the questions she raises are relevant to any art historian. And the questions are, what are the challenges of partition for the narratives of art history in the subcontinent today. What kinds of methods or analysis and modes of understanding are necessary to confront the indeterminate yet proliferating forces of this experience? And what is the role of contemporary art in the relation to emergent critical discourses surrounding partition? She engages with these questions with the themes of history and border. I add in a couple of more questions. I ask 2 more questions where I say, how do we engage with post-memory? So my generational memory is post-memory, So how do we engage with that? So what do I do with these fragmented pieces in my head? Right? Do I really need to document them, or do I just need to let them go? Right? If there is a need to document them, why? And I feel there is an urgency to document them. Otherwise, it's going to be lost history. Right? How does art aid in representation of generational trauma? So my work largely has been in literature. We've been writing short stories, poems, enacting plays. Art is not somewhere where I am skilled. Art is not somewhere with what I have learned, right? But art comes up as an expression for me. This also challenges the idea of linearity of history. So we read history in terms of, okay, in this year this happened, or the most famous statement is in 1947, India got independence from the British colonial rule. How do we define independence? On what cost did we get independence? What was the loss, when independence actually happened? Do we read independence in terms of independence alone? What about the alternative partition violence and the loss owing to partition, and people losing their homes, people migrating to different places, people even losing the ability to communicate, right? If we have known Manto's Toba Tek Singh, right, his rhetoric, upar di khadkhadtiyan betiyan na moong di dal of the Toba Tek Singh, right? It's that inability to communicate, inability to even speak, right? So how do we make up for that? I think this whole process of doing art is a way to addressing memory, is a way to giving expression to these fragmented memories. It's also a way to somewhere heal your own self, right? A wound for which you are not responsible, a wound with which you were born, right? And you can do nothing about it. So what you do is you make sense through different art forms. And that is where exactly I am. So art as a language and cultural codes. There is a viewer engagement. Who sees it? Right? How would you receive these pieces which I've kind of circulated? Right? What is your engagement with it? And design and communication. So over here, I want to bring out 2 things. One is this is a counter to public memory. It's a counter to the idea of having big museums, right? Where you need money, where you need space, right? Where you need a lot of baggage, a process of selection, a process of acceptance, deletion, right? A process of, what piece comes in. Is it an aesthetic piece? Should we have it? Should we not have it? So it's kind of a counter to that. Can we have spaces for private memory? And when I did this art piece, so my father called up and he said, why can't we, let's do something, let's have a wall of memory in our own house. So in my grandfather's room, we're planning to frame all his certificates and everything and put them on a wall. And we would be using that room. It's not that we're going to, reserve that room. Let it be a piece of living memory. Have a wall of memory which becomes a very private space. Tina is going to talk about the Tilak Vihar's Widows Colony, where the women put in photographs, of all those people who were lost. I mean, their family members, men who were killed during the Chowdhry violence. That's a private space of memory. And how those people value it. The 300 crore Rakabganj Museum stands nowhere in front of it. Right? So this is also an attempt to counter the idea of public memory, where your pieces are being judged, right? Where there's this whole process of selection and deletion. art becomes a medium. It's so what seems to be good, right? So if you have just taken a look at all these pieces, and I would like you to maybe bring them up again and feel them, and you would see that they're close, right? If somebody has done resin art, they would realize that resin art is very smooth. It's like a perfect piece, right? And these pieces are actually spoiled, right? These are not, a resin art artist would reject all these pieces, right? Because they are not as smooth, the finish is not there, and interestingly, all these pieces are salvaged. Right? So when I was doing this, the process became very interesting, because if I did resin art for any decorative piece, it came out to be perfect. Right? There would be nothing wrong with the mold, there would be nothing wrong with the setting of the material. But the moment I did an art piece which was to do with partition memory, it got spoiled. And I was quite
Sorry, do you mean spoiled or rejected?
spoiled. I mean, while I was curating them, it would get spoiled.
The spoil, okay.
And-
Interesting.
And I got very frustrated doing that. So I started asking myself, what is this happening, right? And one day I even sat down and I wept. I said, I'm trying to do something, and all these pieces are getting spoiled. And the problem with these pieces is you can't dispose them, right? And I told my husband that I'm out of practice perhaps. And he came up and he said, keep practicing, right? And keep doing it. That's what he said. Somewhere that struck me, and I thought, okay, another piece, one after the other, one after the other. And I took out all the spoiled pieces. And so these are a couple of them which I could carry in here. And I salvaged all of them. So these are salvaged pieces, right? And one piece, which was kind of salvaged is this, right? So I have not been able to bring it. It's a very heavy piece. This is called Chaos and Order. So this started with rose petals. The idea was to make some very nice decorative kind of an art piece, but it turned out to be one of the most ugly pieces. And so it's made on a MDF board with rose petals, resin, and epoxy, and with rangoli colors, right? So I have no control on this. I start with an idea, and what the outcome is, it's beyond my control. So as a curator, this process became very important for me. And gradually I realized there was something in the mind which was not allowing me to come up with neat and clean, delicate, beautiful, aesthetic pieces. And I feel it, I strongly feel it is the working of the psyche. And once I shook hands with myself, there were more pieces, one after the other, and there are a lot of ideas. Some of them I put in here, so things to do with barbed wire. There are many more ideas with the barbed wire. So there's one idea where there's a bird, sitting on the barbed wire. I've brought in pieces of Punjab, abandoned houses, photographs, printed pagris, torn clothes, burnt pages, to work with the vocabulary of partition, right? Recipes, Pothohar magazine, photographs, fulkari, dupatta, maps, keys. So a lot of people had carried keys with them, and they still have the keys. So I'm collecting all rusted keys, right? If people have, please give it to me. So, to do art piece with the key, with trees. So there are trees on the border. Half the tree is in India, half the tree is in Pakistan, and it has been painted accordingly, right? Book covers, the idea right now is to have a lot of collage pieces of Nanak Singh's book covers. Railway tracks was a very important element, in the history of partition. Trains, my grandfather talked about a feeling. So I was looking at, the present photographs from Kahota, thanks to social media, right? So you actually have photographs of River Ling. Okay. So this piece, basically, roses are symbolic of ornamental. Roses are ornamental flowers, right? They're symbolic of tenderness, kindness, love. And so this piece had to be, and in Raisin Art they use a lot of roses actually, right? So you would see very beautifully curated pieces with roses. But here it's all chaotic. If you touch this piece, it might even give you cuts, on the hand. So this idea of touch was very important for me because it could never be a smooth art piece. You had to feel the pain of partition, with the tactile impact of it. And these pieces were bringing in that. So all these rose petals are out. They are half embedded in epoxy, half out. The idea of roses together has been people coexisting before partition, people of all communities coexisting before partition. The colors that you see are colors of community. Saffron for Hindus, blue for Sikhs, green for Muslims. And they're also colors of both the flags, right? So the national flags come in. Now they are, circular, giving in the idea of that how power moves in circles. And here we are talking of the religious power and the institutional power, which proposes to set in an order, right? And so this piece is called Chaos and Order. The barbed wire, right, piece, which is called Santali. So barbed wire reflects restriction, conflict, confinement, and with partition came the dangerous border on earth actually came into existence with partition. So India-Pakistan border is apparently the most dangerous border. It's very, very volatile. We just saw Operation Sindoor, right? Border and barbed wires coexist. Now the contrast between barbed wire and the clean digits suggests a duality, right? So it's 47. 47 is Santali. Santali is a fixed site of memory. So anybody came home, parents would ask, Santali ch tuhada ki nuksan hoya siga, right? Santali ch tusi kitthon kithe aaye sige. So they never said ki 1947 ch tusi kithe aaye sige. So Santali in itself, the word became a fixed site of memory. And in my latest book, I talk about 84 in the same sense. 84 also became a fixed site of memory for the Sikhs, right? And so the image is not 1947. 1947 gives us a reference to the political idea of independence and partition. But Santali is personal memory. It's a fixed site of my memory, my family's memory, anybody's memory who experienced Santali in that sense. And when you touch it, it hurts you, so it's half embedded again, right? So that's to give you that uncomfortable feel. So can ugly things, be art, or does art always have to be nice and, welcoming and pleasing and comfort giving, right? This is a very dear piece to me. It looks like algae, it looks like, somebody says it's a skirt, right? Somebody says something else. So my grandmother wore same clothes in the camp for many, many days. And my grandmother, as the stories go, came from in a way, an elitist family. And I also remember her, she would get the finest of cloth from the market and ask us to get the best of embroideries done for her. As I saw her as my nanny, this is what she would, ask us to do. She would ask us to bring the best of colors. She never wanted us to buy a mouse color gray, the gray colored, the mouse color kind of a thing. She hated it. And she hated it because when they were in the camp, they didn't have clothes. They were in one set of clothes. She was expecting my mother then. She had a 1.5-year-old daughter with her who was my Masi, the eldest Masi. And she would often say, कि we stayed in same set of clothes, सारे कपड़े बड़े गंदे हो गए सीगे, ਤਾਂ ਲੀਰਾਂ ਪੱਟ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ, ਤਾਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਬੜੀ ਕੁਰੈਤ ਵਾਲੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇਖੀ. And then she would say ਸਾਡੇ ਸਿਰਾਂ 'ਚ ਜੂਆਂ ਪੈ ਗਈਆਂ ਸੀਗੀਆਂ, right? And she would tell us this experience of, you know, camp. And then after a couple of months, the mouse colored grey Malaysian cloth was distributed to these people. There were no machines. They were given needle and thread to sew them. So they cut it, you know, I mean, she said chagga jiha bana liya siga. So a shirt is what they made. They stitched it with hand and they wore that, and then they washed their clothes. So this piece is called the cuff. It is in her memory. If you see it, I mean, the piece is out here. If you just take a look at it, it has these rags. You know, it has been torn. And it's a dirty piece. I mean, before curating it, I actually cleaned the window, you know, with this cuff. And so this is like one of my favorites. And the other idea with a similar kind of a thing is, I am now reading.
Sorry to interrupt. Just thought I'll ask, do you still have the original piece? I might have missed that.
No, these are all, we don't have any real original stuff from the grandparents' time. So these are imagined, curated, right? So they came empty-handed. We don't have anything from that time. We just have 100-year-old fulkari, right? And the threads of that fulkari are coming out. So I'm going to make an art piece of it, and I'm going to call it Darning the Holes of Partitions. I'm going to get it darned through somebody. So the other idea which comes from the personal memory is, I was listening to some video, and that fellow said that they were from some place called maybe Chambhol, and somebody brought in rice from that place. And he took that rice home, and he didn't tell his mother that the rice was from, you know, their native place. As the mother was cleaning the rice, the mother started crying, and she said, "Eh ta Chambhol de chawal hai." You know, so the other idea has been to get rice from somewhere. I mean, I'm just thinking where to get the rice from, and, you know, have the inscription in rice of the village's name, and dedicate that piece to, you know, the person whose memory it is. And another thing which I want to do is, I want people to come to my house and let's curate their memories together. So I mean, it's a kind, I mean, I have taken a place where I have a studio room, and I'm inviting people. If they want to do this activity, we do it together. We curate memories together. Okay. This is called Burnt into Silence. So this is history burning into silence. So the paper is the idea of history, right? Now if you see, there are lots of curves in this. So curves represent women experiences, women burning both metaphorically and physically. So there were women who were burnt, there were women who were killed, right? Women thrown into wells. So this piece is basically dedicated to women, and it's a poetic reminder of those who suffered and were silent. This is my grandfather's photograph, right? His wedding picture. I've circulated the photograph with an overleaf note. The note says that this photo was taken by Sarup Singh on the happy occasion of the happy marriage of Gyani Harbans Singh with Harbans Kaur, daughter of Chowdhry Gurdit Singh, in Singh Sabha Gurdwara, Kahota on 27/4/43. So this is actually a Gurdwara from Kahota. Right?
Look at the pillars.
Yeah, and this was built by Sant Akhtar Singh. And Sant Akhtar Singh had said, build a huge Gurdwara, and they were unable to get the well inside.
Yeah.
Right? So they did not have water. And my grandmother would often say कि लोਕਾਂ ने ना अपने बच्चियां ਨੂੰ urine तक पिलाया. Right? So you know, these were the experiences. Now this photograph I have curated as blood-laced promises. So this if you see the outer of it, it's like peach color with flowers in it, and there is this paint which symbolizes blood, and it's a marriage, which was full of bloody challenges and struggle, right? And my grandfather always remembered, and he reported August 47 violence that he witnessed when he traveled from Lahore to Amritsar. So that was the time when, he traveled in that train with dead bodies. He said, I had never thought that I would make it alive. I am still surprised that I survived the violence those days. He expired at an age of 103. And he used to always say, "Main nark dekhya." He would always say, whenever he talked about those days, he would say, "Main nark dekhya." Towards the end of his life, he had stopped talking about partition. He wanted to die peacefully, and he said, "Ho gaya, so ho gaya. Kotha kahota othe reh gaya, asi ethe aa gaya." And he wouldn't want to talk about it. But then it never even escaped him, because once my mother was not around and he asked me where my mother is, and I said she's gone for somebody's cremation. And he said, "Kaun marya? Kahota da siga banda." So even if voluntarily he was in this phase of selective memory, Kahota had never left.
Okay, Ishmeet, we're running short on time.
I'm just done.
Yeah, okay,
Right?
great.
So this piece is called From Partitions to Pain, When Boundaries Bleed. This is the Punjab which we want to have, whatever little 50,000 square kilometers Punjab is left, but that's the actually conflict-ridden Punjab that, and somewhere, we say कि Punjab the struggle khatam hi nahi ho rahi hai. One after the other, something or the other continues in that state. This is the many partitions of Punjab. This is the undivided map of Punjab, right? And I want to thank Devinder from Punjab Digital Library who gave me this map, right? And so this is called the Caged Homeland. And if you again you will feel the wires on the piece. I think that's it. So these are places where history, memory, space come together. So this is art where all this comes together. Stories give birth to art, and every piece of art has a story in it, a narrative that in itself is a site of memory, a story that contains memory that may be an individual's memory, but that leads to a collective experience of returning to history. I am sure many of your memories have also, surfaced with this. J. Winter said, sites of memory are places where historical remembrance happens, and I think these pieces for me are sites of memories where the historical remembrance is happening. These memorables are such sites of memory. Thank you so much.